This video is now in session, and time and again, we've seen how the Republicans, particularly in the House, have been ineffective at governing. Just yesterday, they finally were able to impeach the Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, but just by one vote. And the last time that they tried to impeach Mr. Mayorkas, they actually failed 215 to 215. It says 214 to 216 here because one of their representatives had to vote no so that they could reintroduce this measure just 2 days ago. But even before this success that the Republicans have, you could see in the news how dysfunctional the Republicans in the House were, all the way to the McCarthy era. If you looked at both of the Republicans' successful attempts to get through a stopgap spending measure, you'll see that Democrats actually were the reasons why these measures were were passed by the House. More Democrats voted in favor of these measures than Republicans, and this was through negotiations that were beneficial to the Republican Party, that were beneficial to the conservative cause. And yet the response to these measures was to oust Kevin McCarthy as the Speaker. You can see that 8 Republicans risk their political lives, and their political career has gotten risky because of this vote, and yet they did it anyway. And so we had this historic moment where McCarthy was no longer Speaker, where he was ousted by members of his own party. Why is this? Why are the Republicans ineffective in the 118th Congress? Some may say that Republicans have a very narrow majority, and that's true. Republicans have one of the slimmest majorities in the modern era. But you know who else had a slim majority? The Democrats just the Congress prior to the 118th one. In the 117th Congress, in fact, Democrats had the same slim majority that the Republicans started off with in the 118th Congress. And yet, they were able to pass many landmark bills, including the Inflation Reduction Act, the American Rescue Plan, and the CHIPS Plus bill. And if you see here this graph of Democrats versus Republicans and their defections from their caucuses, you can see that when Republicans were in the majority, that more Republicans defected from their own party, even during the Trump era. If you look at the 116th Congress, the 115th Congress, 114th Congress, you saw these defections happen here at almost the same rate as the Democrats, even though the Republicans had a majority in the House. And here you see in the 118th Congress, those defections have only increased since Trump's era. You can see here that the darker the boxes means more members defecting away from their party leadership. And if you compare these two lines of average defections, you'll see that Republicans have a lower line than Democrats in the past 6 years. So there's certainly something happening on the Republican side that isn't necessarily happening on the Democratic side. And it's not just that the House leadership members are ineffective, because Kevin McCarthy, even though Kevin McCarthy is very controversial among Republicans, there's no denying that he's learned over the years how to count votes and how to negotiate. He learned from Nancy Pelosi, and he has great respect for how she was able to get Democrats in line. So maybe there's something within the Republican Party itself that might just cause this issue. If we look at the Republican ideology, one of their main things, especially in recent years, is the idea of being anti-government, anti-federal government. The Tea Party caucus, which propped up in 2010, was founded not just on an idea of having a smaller government, but completely rejecting the idea of a federal government. You had Republicans like Scott Perry, or rather Rick Perry, I believe, starting to question the existence of complete federal agencies, such as the Department of Education and the Environmental Protection Agency. So you have Republicans in the House, part of the Freedom Caucus, who think that government actually harms the American public. And so through that ideology, they're incentivized to not make progress, to not make, quote, progress in the federal government, in the sense that they think that any progress being made in the federal government is actually a harm to the American public. And so that's why you have a lot of these Republicans who are willing to just defect on any measure, even ones that are bipartisan compromises, because for them, anything short of conservatism is a negation of what they believe is best for the American public. They believe that unless if something is really conservative, then it is a harm to their constituents. So that's the first reason. The second reason may be just that Republicans and conservatives in general, in today's American society, are much more individualistic than Democrats. Democrats repeatedly cite Republicans as ignorant, as self-centered. But for them, what they think is best is just what's best for them, what's best for their district. Many of them come from rural districts where they have no choice but to go with self-reliance, and that self-reliance is a simplistic life, but it's a life that works. And so they bring that ideology to Congress of having that sort of simplistic view of what do I stand for, what do my constituents want, rather than just the overall picture of what does different people in America want. So you have Republicans such as Matt Gaetz and as well as Nancy Mace, who are willing to just focus more on their beliefs, and then you also have Chip Roy, for example, who's willing to focus more on the rural ideology of self-reliance, and that's reflected in their defections from many Republican bills. And when you combine that with how the structure of the House works, which is a governing body that moves slowly, that intentionally moves slowly, then you start to realize why Republicans have grown increasingly, quote, dysfunctional, even though it's not really unintentionally dysfunctional, it's intentional dysfunction. And maybe that's okay, because the founding fathers truly did want the House to be much slower moving than most of us want today. And that's because there's so many different views, there's so many different perspectives in America. You have rural versus urban. Those from the west, from the east to the middle. You also have farmers, urbanites, suburbanites. And this is all reflected in Congress when you see representatives who come from literally any and all backgrounds possible. And then you also have additional groups such as special interests, advocates on the Hill, and then you have the executive branch and the judicial branch. You have the Senate and the House. And so now there's so many different views that move in single pieces of bills and resolutions become much slower. And that's by design, because the framers wanted America to be intentional in what kind of bills they created, unlike the British House of Commons, for example, where they move at rapid pace. They wanted to create a pendulum that moved very slowly, that did not move too far to the left or to the right, because that would create for a more stable country. And so combining that system with the Republican ideology of self-reliance, not just self-reliance, but more individualism in general, and then you start to see that the pendulum to the right moves even less to the right, and that's just the nature of the relationships of the GOP and our governing bodies. So that's the end of this video. Hope you enjoyed it. This video is now adjourned, and I'll see you in the next one.